Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French and English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMB Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzlag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our first episode of season 21, a very special guest, speaker and author and podcaster, Pat Wetzel. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to probably introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Pat, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Of course.
I think you summed it up. Speaker, author, podcaster. Bump in the road is the stories of my guests. They're stories of transformation. They're about how we experience, manage, and navigate life's bumps, because nobody gives us a roadmap for this. And as you start listening to 20, 30, 100 different podcasts, as I do as the host, you start to get a 30,000-foot view, and you start to see all the commonalities that come together that help people navigate life's bumps. And that's really what the book and the podcast and my talks are about.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here today. Now, I'm sure like the purpose of this podcast, Pat, is to have or to give inspiration to our listeners about, especially everyone go through some bumps. That's a given. This is what life throws at us on a day-to-day basis. But no, it's not, it's just about how you circumvent those bumps and how you basically move forward, push forward to be able to reach your goals, whatever that may be. So if you could just help us, I mean, when it comes to you, what kind of bumps did you go through to be able to achieve what you've achieved?
How long do you have?
30 minutes.
Okay, we'll be brief. Let's see. Very competitive schooling, went to Wharton Business School, neurologic disease, divorce, cancer, and self-imposed homelessness as I traveled the world.
Okay. Wow. All of that.
Yes, those
Okay.
are the highlights.
Yes, the highlights. Yeah, obviously that if we have to go into details, that we will need 7 episodes to be. Okay, so when it comes to each and every aspect of what you just mentioned, which one do you feel was the most challenging for you to be able to circumvent beside the cancer?
Actually, divorce for me was the most challenging. I
Okay.
lost everything in my world. And doing that, I lost my identity. I didn't know, I didn't know where I would go, what I would do. All my networks fell apart. It was a very, very difficult time. But interestingly, during that time, I started to learn to fly high performance sailplanes. So I call this period of my life wish, death wish. Now, I didn't want to die per se, but I really wasn't happy. My earthbound life was abysmal, lonely. I cried for a year. But simultaneously, I'm learning to fly sailplanes. Now, sailplanes or gliders, some people call them, are very high performance. They can go hundreds of miles on a breath of air. I've
Wow.
flown over 30,000 feet. I've raced down mountain spines at 200 miles an hour. It's an amazing sport and so beautiful. I can't begin to tell you how beautiful it is. So interestingly, while my life was on two planes, this one awful plane where everything was falling apart and I was just getting slammed left and right, and this other plane where I'm soaring through the sky. And the connection with nature is so profound. I can't begin to even explain it. So one of the lessons I take from that is no matter what's going on with your life, find somehow a way to put one foot in front of the other and be open to serendipitous events. I never planned to fly. It's just a series of events fell together and the opportunity opened and I took it.
Mhm.
And as one of my guests says, just say yes. Nick Atkins says that, just say yes. When opportunity appears, be curious. It may lead nowhere, but it could lead somewhere pretty interesting.
So what about taking calculated risk? I mean, does that include the fact that because you cannot say yes to everything and then put yourself in jeopardy, where do you start analyzing a situation prior to jumping into it?
Well, You can take baby steps so that you're not totally exposed in terms of risk. And I think that's something really wise to do. If you're in your comfort zone, getting out of your comfort zone is very uncomfortable. And the way to do it is, small steps. You don't have to bet everything on one big endeavor. And I think the other thing is to get in tune with yourself, your own intuition, and that helps to guide you. Because I think too often when we go into new things, we look at they're either a success or a failure. I totally disagree with that. I
Right.
think those are external measurements. I think it's really about the experience you have. Sometimes we learn more from our failures than
Mhm.
we do from our successes.
Yeah.
So I really think it's about the journey, not to sound too corny about that. And part of that journey is to be very present. And that's where possibility really lies.
So you mentioned something about the failure part. Most people feel that if they do fail, they feel embarrassed and they're afraid of how other people will perceive them. So if we take this away from the equation by people not saying or displaying all their aspiration, their goals, their project, what they want to do into the future, etc., do you think that can take this element out of this equation about the fear of being judged, the fear of being perceived by others as a failure?
Yeah, I actually go to the Buddhist notion of beginner's mind. Don't project where you're going to be. You don't know. That's the truth. And most of the things we project never happen anyway.
Right.
So let go of that one totally and enjoy the ride a bit. But I think if you can approach things with curiosity as a beginner, it will take you amazing places.
But for those who are seeking validation from others, that's something that it's a part of their DNA. It's in their nature. And as you know, we can never fight human nature. We have to work with it. So how can we train people's mind and letting them know that you don't need that stranger validation or their approval to be able to move on with your life? You need to kind of like detach yourself from whatever other people are looking at you and how they perceive you. But for many, it's hard to do. So that's again a comfort zone that you're talking about.
Very much. And I think we all fall prey to it. I mean, we're all people pleasers on some level or another. And I think as you get a little bit older, you start to realize nobody really cares.
Yes. That is so true. That is
So, and really what makes you appealing or attractive in business or personally is the fact that you are on that path to discovering your own uniqueness. We're all different and we all have remarkable aspects of our personality and our journey. And I think we should celebrate that. And the more we get into celebrating that, being present in our lives, the more the external world falls away. But it's hard. We live in an Instagram perfect world, which is a total lie, by the way.
oh, yeah,
We live in the world that says there are three ways to instant happiness and wealth, which is a total lie, by the way.
Mhm.
You just have to start looking at society a little critically, and most of all, looking at your own life in a more loving way.
I agree with you on this one, Pat. So, do you think, would you agree or disagree that more difficult the bump on the road and more gratification you're going to have as you go over that bump?
Yeah, and I don't know that you ever totally go over a bump. I think sometimes you revisit it for many years on an emotional level. But I think the things that you can do as you get over a bump is to celebrate it. I mean, I look at my flying. I started in a two-seat trainer. I moved on to a single-seat plane. I moved into high performance planes. None of this happened overnight.
Mhm.
All of it required a lot of effort and focus and time. And in each of those instances, there were bumps along the way. And I think that's just I think that's just a human journey. And I think that we need to learn to accept our bumps. If they are what they are, you can't change it. Um, and then it's a matter of what do you do with it? What do you choose to do with it? And you do have choice. I often tell people rewrite your story three or four different ways. From a perspective of gratitude, of love, of hate, of whatever you want to do. Because what you'll start to see is it's just a story. You can tell your story any way you want to tell it. And all of a sudden the power of it starts to dissipate.
So, the bump in the road book, is it just a accumulation of all the other stories that you've heard from the people that you've interviewed, or is it primarily what you've gone through yourself?
A combination. This is the first book in a series. Well, I'm looking at Bump in the Road, Strong Women, Bump in the Road, Business, etc. Um, I tell some of my own stories partly to introduce myself, And in each chapter, what the story I tell about myself correlates to some aspect of what my guest is experiencing. I
Okay.
chose 15 stories from the early part of the podcast because that's when I started writing it. Now I have so many stories and so much wisdom. If I could just find the time, I could probably write 10 books.
Yes, and I know how the time is required for you to be able to write anything. I mean, I just finished one of them, one of my books, like it's called The Happiness Vortex,
Mhm.
and I wrote it in 2.5 years, and it has close to 800 pages long.
Well, my book was twice its size, the size it came out to be. I had to cut it in half.
Oh yeah, it's horrendous. But the thing is that at the same time, I could not shrink it because it has a combination of a lot of quantum physics with happiness, with spirituality. So we basically combine science with spirituality and find some correlation.
Oh, that sounds great.
So, and that's why I had to kind of like a lot of times said, no, this is too deep. No, this is too light. No. So I had to kind of scratch it off, rewrite over and over. That's why it took that long. But at the same time, it's a journey. Like you said, I mean, I experienced a lot of bumps in this book. I mean, compared to all the others. And but for me, I just say, you know what? I'm gonna push forward no matter what.
I think writing is a journey. And certainly the whole book piece of this is a journey unto itself, and it has a lot of bumps.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So when it comes to advising your clients when they do go through bumps, and for them that they've been beaten down by life, by their experiences, by their challenges, whatever else, how do you change their perspective, Pat? I mean, how do you, someone who's been beaten down over and over again, it's kind of hard to find a positive aspect or the positive side of things. So how do you be able to change their perspective?
You know, we've all been there. Let me tell you a story from one of my guests, Eric Weinmayer. Eric went blind at 16, so you can imagine the anger, the social isolation, just everything he went through. He went on to climb Mount Everest, the
Wow.
seven summits, yeah, and he trained 8 years to kayak the Colorado River Rapids.
Oh my God. All this being blind.
Being blind, yep. He's just one of the most inspirational people I've ever met. Eric tells a story. He divides the world into three groups, okay? And these groups are fluid. We've all been in them and we all move between them. There are quitters who are self-evident. There are campers who are the vast majority of people who never want anything to change. They hate change. Now, in all fairness to campers, they may be so beaten up by life that they don't want to put their head out of the foxhole anymore. And then very few people are climbers. And I think in being a climber, that's where you live your most actualized life. And the question of how you get from being a camper to a climber is one that fascinates me. It's one that drives me in my podcast. I am absolutely amazed at the inner strength people find through really difficult times. And I think one piece of it, particularly early on in the journey, is simply to insert energy into your path. Take a step. And it may be the hardest step you ever take. It may be so hard you don't think you can do it. But once you start moving in any direction, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. It will self-correct. But once you start moving, things can start rearranging and happening for your benefit.
Okay, so let's go with that theory. If and of course there's some practicality behind it, but if let's say someone take a step forward, and but they're actually seeing that the step is in the wrong direction. Now
Mhm.
going back, it depends on how deep they are in that step. If how many steps they've taken in the wrong direction, how can you change the way that they look at things and saying, oh my God, if I turn around, is turning around will be the better direction or a better option or a better alternative? There's thousands of different ways to go to a certain location. So how do you give them the power or I would say, the desire to go into another direction, not knowing if it's a better option for them or not?
Well, it's not a linear trip. It's not black and white. It's all shades of gray. And I think in taking baby steps, you assess at each point. And are you going the right way? Does it feel right? Would a little more perseverance perhaps get you there?
Mhm.
How much do you want to go there? How flexible are your goals? Because you may start off on one path and take a bit of a detour, and that may be the best thing that ever happened to you. But
Right.
you have to take that chance. Life is not a safety guarantee
Yeah.
in any part of your life.
I agree. Now, for the way that you approach, I mean, in this book especially, and you said that you're going to have like series of that of different nature of the book. How do you look at, especially if someone wants to be able to write a book, they have the skills, like good knowledge in the English language, etc., but yet don't know how to structure a book, especially from the beginning to the end, like the skeleton of that book. Did you follow a certain path yourself, Pat, to be able to write this book, or you just went with the inspiration of all your guests that provided you, and you just said, you know what, maybe this is something that I could transform into a book? What really prompted you to get into that?
Well, I wanted to share the wisdom for my podcast because it's really profound. And I started off and I went down some false paths. I started off with a program that probably wasn't the best program to use in terms of organizing things. I ran into a bump when I had to translate it all into Word and then find things in this massive document. It was too long, and a little disjointed, so I had to go through a lot of editing and bring it down by half. Um, the whole editing process is monumental and you will miss things and then you go back and you want it to be perfect. There are a lot of bumps along the way, but I think for me, what really drove me was a desire to share this wisdom. And it needs to be shared because nobody gives you a roadmap
Yeah.
for this crazy adventure called life. But I think there are some real common fundamental things that we all share that can really help us navigate life.
So tell us, I mean, tell our listeners, what kind of cancer did you have to go through when it comes to your health, etc., and how did you go into remission?
Nodal marginal zone lymphoma, which is super rare. It's a slow-growing lymphoma until it's not. About 10% of the cases a year transform into an aggressive lymphoma, which rapidly becomes an aggressive problem. Um, quite honestly, I went through 3 rounds of chemo in 6 years, and I had a business that was falling apart. A partner had stolen some intellectual property, registered it with the patent as their own, and I found myself just paying lawyers. And the stress was just overwhelming. So my hair was falling out from stress and I was vomiting blood. So I
Oh,
went to see my oncologist and he said, oh, there are probably 20 really expensive, awful, intrusive, um, uh, exams we can run to see what's wrong with you. He never asked me anything about what was going on in my life. He didn't have at all a holistic perspective on things.
okay.
And I left that office and I remember it so vividly. The corridor's just gray. This is after they redecorated it. Before you can leave, you have to go by the door where you have to pay all, the accounting department where they can nab you to make sure they get all your money. You go to a gray elevator, it clunks down for, a floor. It was just awful. And I'm walking out and I thought, you know, chances are my cancer's back. If so, if the past is indicative of the future, I have 12 to 18 months, maybe 20 months. I don't know how aggressive it is or anything else. I don't know for sure it's back, but I decided I'm not going to live tethered to the medical community. And I sold my house, put everything in storage, and hit the road and went traveling. And I started a blog called Cancer Road Trip.
Wow, okay. And did you transform this into a book or you just left it as a blog?
It was going to be actually a project where every quarter we gave 7 people impacted by cancer an amazing bucket list trip and told their stories against the backdrop of geography. For example, the first trip was Tanzania. So we have Kilimanjaro and the metaphor of a mountain, safari and the metaphor of survival, Zanzibar and the spice of life,
Mhm.
and then rinse and repeat. I was working on lining up about a little over $1 million. Everything was falling in place and travel shut down in 2020. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I've built this social media audience. I have all this money and time invested in this. And I decided to start the podcast. And I thought, what should I call it? Bump in the Road, of course.
Of course.
And that's actually how Bump in the Road came to be.
Great, that's amazing. Now, if you would give, let's say, 3 or 4 pieces of advice to all of our listeners before we end this podcast, how can someone, like, if you have priority, like this is what they should do first, second, third, fourth, to be able to start getting themselves out of this comfort zone, especially if they have their head like an ostrich down under the sand, how to get their head out of it and start taking action to be able to see the changes that they so desire.
I think one of my mantras is, what can I learn? Whenever you're faced with a bump, ask yourself, what can I learn? And that becomes an internal journey. It's not about external approval or anything else. And so once you ask, what can I learn? And if that shifts you towards an internal journey, that's where you're going to find the wisdom that you need. Personally, for me, meditation has been a big part of my journey. And I really recommend people find something, some place where they can experience quiet. I think that removing judgment is really important. Be willing to take a chance. There's no failure here. What did you learn? As long as you learn, you're on the positive side of the equation. And I would say have a sense of humor. Life is a road trip. There are twists and turns and ups and downs and views that will astound you. And you just have to keep moving.
Mhm. Now, the keep moving part, it's for many, it's easier said than done. So you mentioned earlier in the podcast about taking baby steps. So if let's say someone has a fear of, let's say, mountain or height, would you encourage them to be able to face their fear and go on top of a mountain and just like look down and be able to fight that fear? Or what exactly would they have to do to be able to kind of like go into those baby steps?
Well, what's the purpose of, the mountain? It may or may not be relevant. I think the fears, most of our fears are more within, fears of inadequacy, fears of failure, things like that. And I think that what we have to do is turn to that. I think by putting a little energy into the equation, um, baby steps, drive a different way, cook a different meal, get comfortable with small amounts of change, because that expanding your comfort zone in that way will expand your life. And you can expand it by baby steps. You don't have to learn to fly sailplanes. You don't have to travel the world without a place to go back to. You can do little things in your everyday life that have huge meaning.
So the change of pace or the change of environment. So let's say we know that there's a statistic that says that 86% of Americans or maybe 86% of people in the world hate their jobs. So is finding and looking for another job that not may relate to how much money you get paid, but more about a passion that you want to follow in life, is that something that they should consider?
Obviously, it depends on the individual, but I think you need to look at what your real passions are and what motivates you. Now, if you're moving from a high-paid finance job, for example, to wanting to write a book, man, that's a lifestyle change. You better be ready for it.
Yeah.
But there are ways to, take baby steps on that. Write the book part-time, put your toe in the water, get a feel for it. Maybe take a job that's a little more in alignment with your interests.
Mhm.
I think for most of us, it takes years and even decades for a lot of these changes to play out. They don't happen in a week or a month or a year. And I think you need to give yourself the latitude to explore during that time period.
That's so true. So tell us more about where can people find your podcast, Pat, and what kind of like guests do you bring in terms of the nature, what they've gone through, etc. How do you find your guests for your podcast?
Well, when I started, I didn't know if anybody would come on the podcast, but I'm going into my fourth year now, and now people are finding me, which is really nice. And I pursue areas of interest of my own. For example, at least once a quarter, I like to do a near-death experience. And the reason I like to do that is because that experience creates a profound shift in how people view their lives. It's a spiritual shift, and I think it's a very deep shift, and it really intrigues me. It's very interesting. But I interview everything from moms to mountaineers because there's wisdom in everybody's story.
Mhm. So hold on, let me interrupt you for a second. Near death, so you put yourself in a flat line?
No, no, no. I interview people who've
Oh,
died and come
okay.
back.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I said to
Yeah.
myself,
And you can find all these stories at bumpintheroad.us. We're
okay.
on all the major podcast platforms, and Amazon's probably the best place to find the book.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Pat, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time of your busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode, and I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 21 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Stepping out of your comfort zone unlocks a world of growth and opportunity, propelling us to new heights in both our professional and personal endeavors. Embracing challenges fosters resilience, creativity, and adaptability, essential qualities for success. By venturing into the unknown, we expand our horizon, discover hidden talents, and push the boundaries of what we thought possible. Each leap outside our comfort zone strengthens our confidence and self-belief, empowering us to conquer even greater feats. So dare to explore the unfamiliar, for it is the discomfort that true transformation and fulfillment awaits. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.